one of the things that happens when you run a big blog and you deal with people in the comments section all day long is that you're dealing with, a very populist level of messaging, and a lot of people don't understand what economists do except for come in and beat Larry Summers and kind of screw with the system in a way that doesn't benefit them personally. But I think that one of the things that you guys have been able to do with your work in the housing bubble, with your work with the IMF, is introduce these ideas into the bloodstream that wind up becoming, popularized by Naomi Klein in, the shock doctrine, and sort of become pervasive at that point. And that point, people don't realize that you were doing the work like 10 years before.
Well, I do think, people do pick up our ideas, and we always like that. But I think there is one difference. One thing that distinguishes us from a lot of, especially Washington groups, is that we actually don't think that the general public is stupid and incapable of not only understanding but doing something. Like, the general view, if you talk to almost anybody in this town, liberal, progressive even, is that we have a rotten foreign policy, for example, and bad economic policy because the public is conservative. That's the media view, right? We have a center-right country. And our view has always been different than that. We've always blamed the leadership, the people at the top. We've always felt that it's actually not, and then obviously there's a lot of polling data to back us up on that. I remember Bill Clinton once saying, it was right at the end when the New York Times did these kind of exit interviews with him, and he said, if you left it up to the people of the United States, we'd never send foreign troops anywhere in the world. And he was saying it actually to defend the one intervention that was defensible, which was when they sent troops to Haiti to destroy the president that our government had helped overthrow a few years earlier. And but the point was, I think, was really true. We've always seen that. I think partly because of the work we had both done previously. We had both done organizing. Mm-hmm. I actually did union organizing, and Dean did a lot of organizing around, Central America, U.S. intervention in Central America. And we always found that people never shared the views of the more, of the educated elite in terms of the worst policies of this country and our government. And it's true kind of across the board. And that's not to say they can't get brainwashed. Obviously, half the country still thinks they're not going to see their Social Security benefit if they're under 50.
The other thing, I think Barack Obama was born in Kenya, wherever he was.
That's more like 25%.
Depends on what part of the country you're in. It goes up to about 65.
And if you're looking at white people.
That's true.
Exactly.
Yeah. But my point is that we really do believe that change comes about because when you get people to be more informed and to do something about it, it's organization and awareness, and that's how we see it primarily. Even though obviously we spend a lot of time talking to reporters, we talk to members of Congress, we talk to all kinds of foreign governments as well. But we do, I think, believe that. I think that distinguishes us from a lot of other groups.
There's also, in the same vein, I think a lot of what goes on, certainly in economics, is like deliberate obfuscation, because, you take the housing bubble. I find...
I was going to mention, Dean predicted the housing bubble. It was called the housing bubble in 2002.
Well, to my mind, it's a real simple story. You have house prices that are way out of line. We have, at this point, a 100-year-long history. House prices follow the rate of inflation. They suddenly begin to go through the roof in the mid-'90s, coinciding with the stock bubble, which should set off all sorts of alarm bells. Can't be explained by the fundamentals. You look at demand, income wasn't growing, population wasn't growing rapidly, nothing on supply. We're building houses at a real rapid rate. So, to my mind, it's a real simple story. Now, when you get, of course, it finally collapses. The economy's a wreck. And, okay, so what do we get? We get this Keystone Cops routine where they're running around talking about, the models of risk and blah, blah, blah. Well, a lot of those things are very complicated, but they're really aside the point. The basic point was extremely simple. But what you have is among the elites is they very much want to make it sound like, oh, this is a really complex thing. You would have had to have been extraordinarily, insightful or brilliant. No, you just need a little common sense. You just need a basic common sense, and you would have seen this. So, but that's, rather than acknowledge, no, we really blew it. They talk about this now like this was just like this unforeseeable event. There's this book, and I've been told that the guy actually doesn't believe this, and I forget his name, but Black Swan. This is like this incredibly rare occurrence.
This coincidence of epic proportions. Who could have predicted? Yes.
Yeah, and it was absolutely as clear as day, and people should be absolutely furious at the policy makers who got us here, the economists who didn't warn us, because they weren't doing their job. And here you're getting Ben Bernanke reappointed as Fed chair, and people are extolling what a great job he's done. And I'll give him credit. I mean, we didn't have the Great Depression, so he did a good job. And picking up the pieces, a lot of things he did I don't like.
An asteroid didn't hit. Obviously,
the asteroid didn't hit. But it's, the analogy I always say is just kind of like the captain of the Titanic. He goes, look, I got half the people on lifeboats. You should give me another command. I mean, it's close to crazy, but that is how it's talked about.
But most people won't say that, and I guess that is my ultimate question. Is like, I use the analogy, and perhaps it's not charitable, of the veal pen that these liberal economists, institutions, unions get into, where they sort of are captive to the establishment interest. And you guys have managed to escape that in good times and bad for progressives. You really have maintained your independence and your commitment to your principles above a membership in the club. And was that a conscious choice, or did nobody want you in the club?
It's probably both.
Well, there's that old saying, we're both from Chicago, where they say never sell out until you sure you have a buyer.
There you go.
So I don't think we had too many buyers.
No,
really
there
along
are no
the way.
buyers.
I joke. I mean,
You don't have to give us that much credit.
There's tremendous peer pressure to not say things about Ben Bernanke in Washington, D.C. like that. Not to mention from potential funders. I want to give you guys credit because it's a very, very difficult choice that you make to maintain this independent voice. It is not easy, I know.
Well, thanks. We didn't really see it as a choice.
Yeah. No, it's habit, so.
But you are unique, you have to admit. And how did a generation of economists sort of become captive to this neoliberal vision of the world that just doesn't, as you say, doesn't work? Like the math doesn't work.
Well, a lot of it begins with the self-selection process. I mean, one of the things, I give the guy lots of credit for it. Martin Feldstein, the intro, I think he no longer does this now, he's getting up in years, but, for 20 or 30 years, he taught the intro econ class at Harvard. So if you're a smart
you
kid...
You should say who he is, the former...
Okay, Martin Feldstein was the chief economic advisor for Reagan. He's held any number of posts, a very conservative Republican, very prominent conservative Republican economist. So the point I was making about this was he taught the intro econ class. So if you're, smart, ambitious kid at Harvard wants to do this or that, you think you should learn some economics, maybe you're going to be an economics major, you become an economist, you're going to see Martin Feldstein, and you're going to hear very conservative economics. So what's going to happen is if you're a progressive person, you go, I don't want anything to do with that. And you're going to run off and, maybe you'll drop out of Harvard. I don't know what you'll do, but you're not going to stay there and become a grad student in economics. And that's just the most stark example, but the point is that's what economics had become. So if you were progressive, you almost certainly ran off somewhere else. And we actually, years ago I used to say, if I had progressive students, because I taught before I came here, and I'd say, well, you probably don't want to go into economics. And then after a while I realized, no, you do want to go into economics. And we do our best when we have people come here as an intern, if they're, they have to be good at math because otherwise they'll beat you up. So, but if you could deal with the math, I certainly encourage people to go into economics. But the self-selection process is a really big thing. So right from the onset, most people who are progressive aren't going to go into economics. But then the other part is, let's say you get beat up every step along the way. I remember when we were in Michigan, I had a professor that, if you made some comment like, well, you're concerned about unemployment, poverty, well, you should be over in sociology. And you can put up with that, but I mean, do you really want to? Most people, if they're progressive, they're going to end up somewhere else. Or eventually they go, okay, I'll do what you say. I want you to be my dissertation advisor, and you're going to help me get a job, and you give up.
So, which economist think tanks on the right end of the political economic spectrum do you respect and follow?
I appreciate some of the stuff that comes out of Cato.
Yeah, I was
mean,
going to say Cato too, because on the foreign policy, they were the first to oppose the Iraq War, and they generally take a anti-interventionist stance on foreign policy. So, that's a principle. It's a kind of a libertarian principle on their part, and I have to respect them for that.
Yeah, also on the economics, I remember Bill Niskanen, I think he's now like sort of semi-emeritus, but he'd been the chair or president. I'm not sure exactly what his title was there. But I had debated him a number of times. He's very conservative, but he wouldn't make stuff up. So I remember once I was debating him on a flat tax, and I got the answer first. I said, well, flat tax is about having middle-income people pay more so the rich will pay less. And then he responds, he goes, well, that's pretty much right. And then he went on to argue why he thought it was good policy. But, he wasn't, I've been on other people who go, oh, no, everyone's going to pay less.
And, if you're going to, besides the right, there's the center think tanks, which are very neoliberal. The Peterson Institute for International Economics.
I don't consider them centrist.
You consider them right-wing?
Yeah, just posing.
Well, I was just going to say that there is work, there is some good work that comes out of there.
Isn't Simon Johnson a fellow at the Peterson Institute?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's written some good stuff.
Yes, he has some good stuff.
And on the other hand, he's very committed to the IMF. He
Yes, he
testified
is.
to the Congress after, even though he said very much a lot of the same things that we said about the IMF. For instance, he acknowledged that the main reason for this huge infusion of cash that they're getting getting this year was to bail out the banks in Western Europe for their bad loans in Central and Eastern Europe. And he acknowledged that in a column, and then just prior to that, I think it was, he had testified to Congress and said that we need $2 trillion. $2 trillion. They're only offering one for the IMF. So
Yes, it's trillion with the T.
yeah, that's
Because
trillion
people
with the-
can't quite believe that there is.
So, but I do think there is some good work. I was thinking of William Klein's book on the dollar and the trade deficit, for example. You get some good work out of there, but overwhelmingly, the problem is, and they're not all that conservative necessarily, but they're very committed, I think, to these big institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, and then to various levels to the orthodoxy when it's wrong.
So who were your big influences in terms of how you approach policy questions?
That's a good question. You can take that one first.
Big influences. Well, I can't really. And pretty ad hoc. You look for what's worked out. I'll tell you, one of the people I admire for having a good strategy is Newt Gingrich. It's quite striking. I happened to hear him speak somewhere because I was speaking after him, and there was some event. This was back in, I think, like 2003, and at that point, of course, the Republicans were in control of everything. And there was some scandal, or I really don't remember the specifics, but Gingrich gets up there and he goes, the Democrats think this is going to help them. This isn't going to get them anywhere. He goes, if you want to get somewhere, you have to think of where you want to be in 20 years. And then you have to think of, where you have to be in 10 years to get there, and where you have to be in 5 years to do that. And then you have to think of what you're going to do tomorrow to, get. And who on the Democratic side does that? All they're
Well, it
thinking about.
didn't work out so well for Newt. But.
Well, he did take over. Let me
He did,
go
he did.
back to 1992, 1990.
I was
Who
going
thought
to say,
that Republicans
his
could?
2-year plan was great.
Yeah, no. Well, he worked for more than 2 years.
I
He
know.
knocked right out. It was a very effective speaker. In
yes.
was it 88? He got him on this crazy book thing. Wright was corrupt, but but nonetheless, that would have easily slid by. The Republicans had basically reconciled themselves to be a permanent minority party at that point, and Gingrich said he wasn't going to do that.
Yeah.
So he did. I give him credit for his strategy. I hate the policy, obviously, but it was he really planned this out, and it was a remarkable accomplishment.
He's of late started to have these, C3, C4 lobbying the the move on of the right, his Freedom Works, where he spends $7 million to make 12 in direct mail, and then spends $4 million on private planes. I don't know.
Yeah, well,
it just seems
what he
like,
might be doing today might
seems like more for Newt.
Yeah, well, that may well be the case today. As I'm saying, I'm referring to his takeover in '94, and I'm not arguing for his soul. I'm just simply talking about giving him credit for having an effective political strategy.